Hey guys, JB here from Alpha Wolf Consulting, coming to you today with another episode of Spirituality and Me. And this episode is all about pondering deeper into consciousness. So I'm just going to talk through some, not revelations, but just some sort of understandings that I've come across or experienced within myself around consciousness. So just truths I've learned within myself through experience and sort of testing and measuring around consciousness. And it's a funny thing because consciousness is sort of the baseline of the universe, of everything. It's consciousness is a form of energy, and energy is the sort of underlying baseline of life, is the transfer of energy. That's what makes everything alive. That's what makes us think, is the transfer of energy in our brain between our synaptic pathways. So in understanding this, we're understanding that all forms of life, all forms of the universe in life, like everything in the universe, is a form of consciousness. You know, some of it is consciously aware, some of it is not consciously aware of its consciousness. Like, it depends on the complexity. Like, for example, you have one tree, it doesn't have a neural network, but a group of trees clumped together creates like neural networks in their root system and transfer information. So to the level of the complexity of the ability to transfer, you know, knowledge or information or data, is the like level of awareness. You know, the more experiential data an animal can perceive and, you know, comprehend, the more or the higher the complexity of, you know, their state of conscious awareness. So in understanding this, is just understanding our own, you know, makeup. So our brain is not what creates consciousness. Because our brain can do a complexity of tasks, it is able to facilitate consciousness. Consciousness is something external to, you know, just our brain. It's sort of like water. Like, I can drink a cup of water, but that is not all of the water. But it is a part of all of the water. So, like, my consciousness, or my conscious awareness of my consciousness, is, you know, that cup. So it is separate from all of consciousness, but it is also connected to all consciousness. And this is a funny thing, because the only thing that creates separation is the psychological construct of our mind. So the psychology that's been developed through society, through, you know, evolution and all of this, to create fundamental frameworks of what existence is and what existence means. Because, you know, to a tree, what is existence? To a squirrel, to an animal, you know, to a fish. So it's all relative to that what is experiencing it, the meaning of it. So, you know, you give the meaning to, you know, the experiences you have, and what that meaning is and how significant that meaning is. So essentially, we're shaping our, you know, reality to be everything that we want in reality. So everything that, so we usually seek what brings us joy. But sometimes, you know, And when we think about what brings us joy, joy is just having an equilibrium state between, serotonin, dopamine, and oxytocin. And when our brain chemistry, through interactions and experiences, because that's how typically, through experiences and interactions is how we naturally release those chemicals. But unfortunately, it's also released through food, through alcohol or drugs, through different forms of stimulant products like nicotine, caffeine, sugars, and all of this, that we're able to artificially sort of release those chemicals. But that creates in the psychological construct, these easy ways to get what is desired by the brain or the body. So the psychological construct will create stories and narratives around why these things are needed in the life. And that's a funny thing, because we think of like all of these mental illnesses as illnesses, but a lot of them, some of them, like take for example schizophrenia, like because of the chemical imbalance in the brain, like it causes dramatic effects on their perception of reality and on, many of those things. So, that illness is something significant. But a lot of the minor illnesses like depression and things like that are simply frames of thinking and states of mind and, narratives that entrap us into becoming into these states. So a funny thing is that our subconscious mind and our conscious mind will seek that which fulfills us in terms of releases serotonin, dopamine, or oxytocin. So we'll always move towards that, and you'll see it in everyone's life. You'll see it in your own life. I have it in my own life. Things like drinking coffee, things like adding sugar, things like, these are cravings that, the brain and the mind are creating, and the psychology. Things like the narrative of, I'm not as alert until I have coffee, until I have a stimulant. These are just narratives. They don't actually represent it. The quickest way to become at the heighten of alert is to expose yourself to very, very cold, shock therapy. So having a cold shower makes you more alert for a longer duration than the artificial stimulant of coffee. But that's the thing, is our mind will always create our psychological construct will always create, and our psychological construct is just our values, beliefs, the identity of self that we create for ourselves. And the funny thing is that we are the ones that are creating that psychological construct. So anything that is considered to be negative or that we don't want, we can alter that. But also in understanding, biochemical responses and how our brain chemistry works and different stimulants that do it, things like just going for a walk can stimulate your mind in terms of, serotonin and dopamine releases at a much higher but gradual rate than, eating, greasy food, eating overly sweetened food, having, energy drinks or soft drinks that are high in sugar, smoking cigarettes. So the thing is that there are many ways you can offset, these sort of pitfalls and the ups and downs of the biochemical responses. So things like understanding walking, but also understanding that it's okay to have whatever, crutch that you have in life, like so long as it's done within a manner that you deem as being acceptable. So, you know, like for example, if you enjoy drinking alcohol, you can drink 10 bottles of alcohol a night, like of liquor a night. If you deem it to be acceptable, that's acceptable. It doesn't mean you're going to live long. You'll probably last a couple of months or a year, but that's the thing. Like, you got to accept the outcome. So whatever we do in life, we're naturally looking to create the most positive outcome, but the problem is that we get stuck in these traps of narratives from our psychological construct or identity of self or ego, if you want to put it like that, that limit us to only being able to do certain things or get certain things. And it's all artificial because the self doesn't enjoy change. So when we want to change things or we want to, you know, do new experiences, the self usually doesn't want to, because it's usually easier and more efficient to do routine things. That's why it's so easy to fall into routines, is because that is naturally how our brains are wired, because the more we do things on repetition, the better we get at it. So our brain always seeks to do things repetitively, in terms of, you know, if I shift my focus from my you know, main dopamine release from being hiking to being watching TV series, you know, I'm going to get the exact same dopamine releases. It's just transferred. Because you got to understand, when we're watching series, when we're listening to music and things like that, like these are all like releases for dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. When you're watching a movie and, you know, the experience is similar to your experience, you naturally, and it's through evolution and through building societies, that we need to align to people who do what we do and believe what we believe. So it's a natural way that we align to other people, is through shared experience and through shared, you know, interests. So watching movies releases oxytocin, serotonin, and, you know, if we're watching a comedy and we're laughing a lot, that's going to release serotonin, you know, oxytocin if there's other people involved, or if we're watching a live comedy show, because there are other people there as well. So in our mind, we're experiencing it with other people. So, you know, this sort of stuff, understanding this and how consciousness is that there are three states of consciousness within each of our minds. There is the conscious aware side of our brain, so like the logical side of our brain, which is our conscious, you know, brain that we identify ourselves as controlling. There's the subconscious aspect or side of our brain, and then deep in our subconscious, where consciousness is formed around the microtubule, is our higher consciousness. And this is the consciousness, or the link to consciousness, that drives the body. But wherever we focus our attention on, so if I focus on my emotional state or my emotional responses, I'll fall into my subconscious mind, because emotions aren't in the logical side of your mind. So, you know, and if I'm in my emotions, I'm not going to be very logical. And then, you know, if I realize that, you know, my emotions, like I am not my emotions. The emotions I feel, I am just experiencing. I am not them. I am not creating them. They are just there. And then when we understand the thoughts, that I am not my thoughts, and I am not the one, you know, I am the one directing thought, but I am not the one creating thought. Do you sort of understand? Because if I am the one creating the thoughts, then I am my conscious mind. So I cease to be my subconscious mind, because we can only focus on one. So the higher consciousness is just understanding that we are the ones directing but not executing to an extent. And when needed, we execute. So for example, you know, we can lean into our emotions or we can lean into our logic, but we don't want to get stuck there as that only being the way that we deal and move through life, because it's self-limiting. So the key is to have a balance between, but to realize that you're the one directing the movement, not the one moving. The movement is a result of the directions you give. So, like, to experience this or understand this is just to understand you direct the movement, and then you enact it through actions of doing the movement, okay? But you don't need to think about the movement you're doing because you've already thought of it. You've already decided. So it's sort of like you make a decision and then you execute that decision, regardless. And that's a funny thing, because if you're in your mind, you know, it's quite easy when we're in our logical side of our mind, our conscious side, that it's easy to make decisions based on external environments, like our external environment and what's happening, and, you know, the different, like, not variables, but the different indicators or the different things that are sort of spiking. So, you know, maybe our relationships aren't as good as they should be. Maybe this, maybe that. You know, maybe our finance isn't as good as it should be. Maybe we're not as happy as we should be. All these different things, or all these different fires may be happening, like, you know, bills and things like that, like different constraints that are in the logical side, because they're all aligned to the identity of self. Like, so to understand this is just to understand the language we use. You know, my bill, or I've got a bill. Like, it's a bill. It's not my bill. Like, to understand this is just understanding that some of our language will keep things at an arm's length, and some of our languages will align it and attach it to ourselves. So, you know, and think about this in terms of community. It's the language we use to relate to others and sort of engage and become a part of. So when we create relationships and bonds and friendships and all of this, we're essentially like not becoming one, but we're merging interests. So I think about your best interests, you think about my best interests. It's not all just about me. Because that's one of the things, is that if we go into a relationship or anything like that with the identity of just the self and no other to the self, then we're going to take actions at the expense of others because we don't value the outcomes to them. So it's in the logical sense, okay, we can justify why taking harmful or hurtful actions is valid and acceptable, but in the overall truth, it's not really acceptable to harm people, because, like, you do that damage. Like, you have to live with the results. Like, that's sort of how it goes. So to understand this is just to understand that in all actions within life, we will naturally seek to hold relationships with other people that are mutually exclusive, like in the best interests of both of us. And we, you know, make sacrifices. So for example, you know, if you're out at the store with a maid or something like that, and something happens and their bank card doesn't work, like you pay for it, and it's not about getting something in return, It's just, a mutually exclusive relationship. If you were in that position, you would want the friend to do that for you. So it's sort of like the problem with being the identity of self and only thinking in the context